Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is live stream number 23 here on the channel. We do these about once a week. Sometimes we skip a week, sometimes we do two. This is the first one this week so far, and today's date is June 15, 2022. We have a number of people in the chat. We've been chatting prior to this recording starting. Welcome, whether you're in the chat on Twitch right now or you're listening on YouTube after the fact. Either way, good to have you here, and I look forward to the comments either in the live chat or in the comment area, which we use as a discussion area on YouTube. Before we get started with anything today, thanks to the patrons whose names are on the screen right now. Patrons who've been supporting for a year or longer, their names are in yellow, so special thanks for sticking it out this long. Really, we don't do ads on the channel. We don't do sponsorships, anything like that. Don't want to make the channel commercial. So the patron support is vital. It has allowed me to spend a lot more time making content for the channel, doing these live streams and everything like that. So, thanks to all the patrons, whether it's a small donation or a large one, it's encouraging. Of course, the more, the bigger the amount at the end of the month, the more time that I can spend on this. So anyway, it's much appreciated. Then also, after the content is created and uploaded, engagement helps. So remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. All of that really helps. We just recently crossed 8,000 subscribers here at the channel, which is big. Channel's been going for 2.25 years, and crossing 8,000 is, pretty steady growth. We've been growing between 350 and 550 subscribers a month. So it's great that everybody's here. I made a post about that recently on the channel, and a lot of people were saying congratulations. And I say, congratulations to us all. I'm glad that there are this many people out there who are interested in studying socialism, of actually, we do a lot of audiobooks at the channel, and then we do other videos that are really closely based on theory and on the readings. So, there's a very theory-oriented channel. Of course, applied theory. Marxism is scientific socialism, so theory is not just abstract. It comes out of practice. We study the systems in effect today, and then we theorize about what makes them go and how to change them, and then we attempt to change them. And our theory comes out of that. It's a working theory, it's practical, it's scientific, it's applied, and then we evaluate the results and see where errors were made, but we really try to find what works. So just to do a quick channel recap before I get back to the chat that I was talking with before we started recording, what's new in the last week. So over on the community tab at YouTube, of course, Twitter is sort of an ongoing thing. If you're not already following, it's at Socialism S4A. I'm just a regular commenter like everybody else who happens to have a channel. And, that channel has been built up over the last 2 years, which is great. But, come follow on Twitter. I do follow back unless you're a miner or crypto bro or something like that. And even the miners, eventually you'll not be a miner. So hang in there and, maybe I'll follow back at some point. But, it's not really a for kids channel so much, but anyway, so over on the YouTube community tab, promoted a couple of videos. There was a video about the Uruguayan left. There was an interview that Bad Empanada did. And, for all the kind of clowning around that Bad Empanada does and the sort of sarcastic takedowns of things, many of which are quite valuable, this was a pretty serious interview about how the Uruguayan left managed to make exactly the kind of coalition that I'm always saying the United States needs to do. Uruguay also has a two-party system, and just like the United States, like you get two capitalist parties to choose from, a right-wing and a further right-wing one. And they had a lot of different left parties and just, different kinds of opposition. And they did effectively create a left coalition that actually has been having success. So there's a lot to be learned there. Also, Twitter account I like a lot, Best D Marks, BESD Marks, is building a YouTube channel. They did some videos, I think a 3-parter about how green capitalism is a scam. capitalism can't be sustainable or green. It's constrained by the profit motive. And no matter what type of ideology capitalists want to develop, that ideology is going to be curtailed by the profit motive slash mandate. So anyway, they did really good work there. And then they put out another really good video called The Betrayal of the German Revolution, Part 1. So, if you're interested in Rosa Luxemburg and all the stuff that happened leading up to, basically between World War I and World War II, the rise of Hitler, why did that happen, etc. You got to understand the socialist movement, the communist movement, the relationship with the more liberal parties, social democracy, and good video. What can I say? So what else is new? Third video that I plugged is from Prolekult, Prolekult. Title of the video is For Peace on the Imperialist War in Ukraine. 41 minutes of your life well spent will be 41 minutes watching this video. Go look that up. Highly recommend it. So actually Marxist take on what's going on between Russia and Ukraine. The United States is now a fossil fuel exporter in competition with Russia. We see basically, obviously the United States and the EU much stronger, more established, etc. But that's how the game goes. Friendly competition during peaceful times turns into unfriendly competition and war in more troubled times. And that seems to be what's happening now. The danger for the working class coming out of that really can't be understated. So, overstated. Brain's still coming online here. What else? We got a couple of quotes also from Marx's critique of the Gotha program. I think two of the most important quotes, I did share those on the community tab, and then I also uploaded that audiobook. And then also just a quick little thing on the community tab about how the US will be ending the COVID-19 testing requirement for air travelers entering the country. We're going to come back to this in a second when we do the COVID update to start off this stream. It's like they're trying to import new strains into the country. And anyway, we'll look at on a region by region basis why this is sort of really bad timing for that. Not that it's ever good timing, but the current surge that we're in has been level for a while, and this is probably going to make it kick up, in my opinion. Other videos we got up, two audiobooks by Lenin, Democracy and Dictatorship from 1918, and Draft Theses on National and Colonial Questions from 1920. Two great works. I think that both of these are from the Marxist-Leninist Reading Hub. If not, they're for another recommended reading playlist that may not be assembled yet. So I'm working on readings for a couple of different recommended reading lists, and I think that they're really good, and I think that you're going to see a lot of good audiobooks going up on the channel. Not that there normally aren't good audiobooks going up in the channel. I think you'll see some especially good ones going up soon. So that's a brief sort of roundup of what's been going on and why, to some extent, on the channel. Today, in addition to talking with the chat, we're going to be doing some current events. And specifically, I want to do some NLRB stuff, so kind of know your rights things regarding unions and protected concerted activity for U.S. workers. That's where I'm located, and that's what I know best. So unfortunately, I can't do other countries, but we can at least do the U.S. Also, for this stream and probably the next stream, I want to do some, I want to do some coverage of kind of Antifa right-wing, Democrats are right-wing too, but the especially far right. We have some articles regarding groups like, Patriot Front, some other stuff. I also have some articles, hang on. Noisy traffic going by. Also have a bunch of articles regarding the Republican Party, which is mainstreaming and also helping to fuel that far-right stuff far more than it's getting credit for, I think. But, a lot of that's because the Democratic Party is the main, quote, opposition, which of course they aren't, not really. They're funded by the same big donors that fund the Republican Party. And of course, right now they're doing a lot on the January 6th stuff. And uh, January 6th, I mean, you don't want a fascist movement. That's not a good thing. But the Democrats, it's like closing the barn door after the horses have already gotten out. You know, this is their election strategy for the midterms. They could actually represent workers' needs. I mean, I'm just saying, hypothetically, that is a thing that a political party could do and, you know, rally lots of voters to your party. Of course, they're not going to do that. Again, they're controlled by the same big donors that control the Republican Party. And they stand in the way of any kind of actual left party, which we need to get going in the United States. We need a big mass left party or coalition of left parties, and it needs to be effective. We've talked about that many times, and I'm not really going to go into that today. I feel like I've kind of been a broken record on that subject. Not like the message doesn't need to be repeated a lot, but I have to give myself a break sometimes from just repeating it. But yeah, anyway, that's their midterm strategy basically, is point out some accurate observations about the really concerning things going on in the Republican Party. The problem is they're not obviously sincerely an anti-fascist party. They're a fascist collaborating party, the Democrats. So that's the problem. They stand in the way of the left, and then they don't really oppose the Republicans. And then when it comes time for votes for elections, you know, they will hype up how scary the Republican Party is, but a lot of people know that the Democrats are kind of why the Republicans are as big as they are. You know, we played the clip of Nancy Pelosi talking about the need for a strong Republican Party and all this shit. Anything to keep the left at bay. Anything. You know, the capitalists that fund both the Democrats and the Republicans, they need to keep the national political discourse between the center right to right wing Democrats and the right to far right Republicans. They can't have it moving left. So anyway, we're in the position that we're in. So it's not that what the Democrats say about the Republicans is necessarily inaccurate. It's just that it's incredibly hypocritical and insincere. So, you know, you get people sometimes like, oh, I don't care about 1/6. I don't, you know, care about MAGA. Well, honestly, you should. You should. We're in kind of a really bad position right now. But yeah, I mean, don't listen to the Democrats per se. They're insincere. All right, anyway. Before we get into the current events and everything like that, let's talk to the chat. So somebody was asking me, I love this, and I appreciate the thought. Somebody asked, what would I think about going on the Deprogram podcast with Hakeem, Ugopnik, and Second Thought? Somebody says, I would love to hear that conversation. And what I have to say is I haven't been invited on, so it would be a little awkward because to go on, I would actually have to like crash it and like hack my way in. And then what would I say? So, you know, if invited, you know, that might be a fine conversation. But I have not been invited yet. And, you know, I was mentioning before we started recording, I really haven't done any appearances since 2020. There are a number of reasons for that. I may have said some of this before, but really quickly, you know, in 2020, when I started doing this channel, I was kind of blindsided by some of the stuff going on. Like, for example, what we would call the PATSOC phenomenon or patriotic socialists, kind of right-wing error, like fascist adjacent stuff that's calling itself Marxist-Leninist. And that in 2020 was not as clearly delineated. Like those people hadn't kind of been labeled and boxed off yet. And so they were sort of strewn throughout the entire Marxosphere on YouTube and other social media. And so I was trying to navigate that and while building up a small channel where, you know, when you're small, you can get brigaded and stuff really easily. And I didn't have the right people blocked at that time. So it was difficult and also just super confusing. And so in 2021, I kind of swore off like doing any collaborations for a while because I just didn't want to. Well, first of all, I wanted S4A to be bigger, which it was growing anyway, and I just wanted to be more established, and I wanted to have some time to set out, you know, what are this channel's positions on different topics, and also I wanted to get to a lot more readings. Now that it's 2022 and we crossed 8,000 subscribers, I am reaching out to some of the people who have invited me on their show. And so there's a few talks about I might do a few appearances. But I did kind of want to get the channel over a bunch of those hurdles before, winding up in some really weird positions, which has happened in the past. And I would really prefer for that not to happen again. I'm really trying to make as few mistakes as possible going forward. It's difficult to make zero mistakes, but anyway, that's sort of been the priority with that. But anyway, there seems to be a lot of support for that. I am mutuals with Second Thought on Twitter and stuff like that. So, there's a little bit of contact. We'll see what happens in the future. Apparently, a lot of people will reference S4A, in people's Discord servers and stuff like that as a good source for, audiobooks and discussions and stuff like that. So I'm glad that people are finding it useful and that it is the service that I had, set it up to be. In fact, I think it's really taken on a lot more than I envisioned in the first place, which is part of working with the audience, working with the chat. A lot of people who are regulars who message or comment a lot. You give ideas to this channel, it becomes something bigger than whatever it was, just the seed of it, in my brain back in 2019 when I started the Facebook page that started all this out. So I really appreciate everybody here. This is a community effort. And, we should all be proud that it's growing. So anyway, what else do we have here? So somebody says, I have no idea how I missed the PATSOC or, right-wing Marxist, fascist adjacent, chauvinist kind of thing. I think I literally found this channel and tuned everything out. Well, good. I mean, if and that's what I'm always saying at the end of the videos, the more that people engage with the videos, like, share, subscribe, etc. That reminds me, actually, somebody was just saying, oh, this channel is underrated. I hear that a lot, like most underrated channel, on left YouTube or whatever. There is a remedy for S4A being underrated. Rate it. Like, share, subscribe, and comment, and all that stuff. And, then it'll be less underrated, I guess. It will find its audience. But anyway, that's the point, is we're trying to make the channel easy to stumble across. When people go looking for stuff on socialism, that they're able to find it easily and that it's relatively high quality. That's the idea. We're trying to raise the bar and make things accessible. There are other channels doing the same. And like I said, I try to, plug their videos and stay in touch with those people, at least to some extent. And I think it's better than it was 2 years ago. So I think that the movement is growing as reflected in the social media. So remember, the social media, people say it's a bubble or whatever. It is somewhat reflective of reality, though. I do think that the far left in the US is growing, and I think that it's taking on characteristics that it hasn't had for a really long time, such as embracing terms like socialism and communism, Marxism, Leninism. Again, these things are getting resurrected and coming back. So, celebrate the wins. It's still growth at this stage. It's still, on the way up, but it's a good thing. So anyway, but yeah, about the PATSOCs, just because I felt like I wasn't learning if it wasn't theory, especially in audiobook format, which is how I, quote, read. Yeah, a lot of people like the audiobooks. Some people have said that they like to read along with a text, whether it's online or like a physical book. And it's not always exactly the same word for word, between editions and translations and stuff like that. Plus, sometimes I'll change, connecting word here or there just to make the sentence flow better. But obviously, I'm not making like major revisions. But yeah, people learn in different ways. The main thing is to just know the history of it. There's so much to the global socialist communist movements that are not taught in any schools in the US. You might get a little bit of labor history if you have a very liberal professor. Liberal in the left liberal sense, that values, the labor movement or like just any kind of social democratic type of stuff at all. But that's about probably the most that you're going to get. Anything beyond that would really be kind of an exception. So anyway, I'm glad that you were able to bypass a lot of the crap, the stupid fucking garbage that's out there and just stumble on S4A. Good. you know, and again, this isn't the only channel you should be listening to, but you know, I'm glad that it's getting to a point where it's easier to skip over some of the crap. So let's see. Oh, okay. So another comment. Hi, I watched the Prol Cult premiere of their Ukraine documentary, the one I was just plugging, and the chat was full of stupid pat socks. They were getting roasted, but were too stupid to realize. Yeah, that's a real feature of Pat Socks. You see it on Twitter a lot. They just post these things which are like, if you are not listening to Infracell 5 hours a day, you would never come up with this stuff. Like, oh God, actually, let me put it on the screen. Here's a great example of like, you know, new brainworms just dropped. I gotta type, so here a little clicking. Here we go. You cannot make this shit up. So, A, name me a single anarchist society that has committed a genocide. Now, there's a lot of things you could say to that, like show me a single anarchist society, for example. But you get the point. I mean, anarchist society is not committing a ton of genocides. First of all, there aren't many, but the response, Nazi Germany. I mean, it's like out of a cartoon. And then, you know, the response, Nazi Germany, the world's most highly centralized fascistic autocracy, is anarchist. You can't make this up. Infracell then went on to do like a long stream about this. I have the clip somewhere. Somebody posted it on Twitter. But you can't make this shit up. But this is the kind of stuff they're running around saying. And, you know, people are like, oh, it's an act, it's for attention, whatever. I don't think so. This goes far beyond. And honestly, you know, if it was all a joke, you'd think that that would be stated at some point. What effect it's having is I mean, there are people who used to be in the S4A audience who unfortunately got taken in by this stuff. And I don't know what was going on in their life that this, you know, that seemed like clearly obvious disinformation seemed like better to them. But it did sweep up a lot of people. Whether we're better off without them, I don't know. I do think that some of those people were just susceptible to peer pressure and the kind of, you know, psychotic bullying routine that goes on. I think that people do get intimidated by that. Not everybody, but some people do. And they get swept up in this kind of, you know, George Washington was a Maoist or like whatever the fuck kind of crazy nonsense comes out of that sphere. It's just pollution. So, yeah, as far as being too stupid to realize, you know, willful ignorance, key component of fascism. I think that what's going on in that realm is a special subset of it. But, you know, it's not your standard MAGA stuff, although it gets tossed in with standard MAGA talking points, for sure, and sort of tropes, if you will, because it generally is coming from a right-wing place, those kinds of beliefs. But anyway, I did speak a little bit with Prolcult, and that was definitely a phenomenon that was happening. And the same thing happened in S4A, which is kind of what we were talking about. They were like, hey, I'm getting like a ton of these comments from like Pat Socks. And I was like, the same thing happened. Noisy day. The same thing happened in S4A when I denounced the Russian imperialist aggression. So, I mean, yes, they're not the only imperialists in the world. And of course, the larger imperialist has been fucking with them. It doesn't make them also not a smaller imperialist, though. So, you know, it is what it is. If you have any understanding of class dynamics, class analysis, imperialism, that's obvious. But, you know, just getting the amount of hate that you get as a Marxist, I mean, I guess I'm starting to get to the point finally where it's not bothering me so much because, you know, for the first couple of years of doing this channel, it was like I was trying to get caught up with where is the scene at. And when you're in that position, you're a bit more vulnerable to just, you know, oh, well, people are saying this. Why are they saying it? Do they know something I don't know? Even though they seem to be clearly wrong. Do they know something I don't know? And should I hold back and whatever? And then after a while of looking at that and just going, no, these people are making error after error. you start to realize like, no, this just simply needs to be denounced. But going through that, uh, that turnover in the audience and in the community, if you will, it's jarring, and I know that Pole Cult went through that, just that same jarring experience. And I think that anybody does who stands up against that stuff. So, I mean, it passes, it comes and it goes. But it sucks to think that you have a certain amount of Marxists out there who you're communicating with and you're listening to and you're, messaging back and forth with. And then you find out that like a substantial chunk of them are just engaging in like blatant errors. So, yeah. Somebody else was saying that people talk a lot about the parasocial relationships that some of the audience members have with their favorite channels. But it is true that channels, like content creators, also like we have our regular people who comment a lot or whatever. And, it's just human nature to get some sort of, familiarity and attachment. You can try to keep a professional detachment, but on some level you're like, oh yeah, these are the people who like show up for the channel. And then to have that to find out that they're not really on the same page at all, it is kind of like having the rug pulled out. It's like, oh, I thought we were building something here. And of course it's even worse when it's people you know in real life. So yeah, it's a real thing. This is something, at the end of the day, like as the months go by and the movement sorts these different questions out and we figure out who's on which side of what issue, it's going to be better for the movement. But it is a somewhat painful process of having those kinds of clashes and conflicts in the meantime. But yeah, it sucks. What can I say? I wish that everybody just got it. I do. Um, but and they are vocal. And not all of these accounts are legit either. Some of them are just straight up troll farms. So you don't know which is which because you don't really know who anybody is. But yeah, something to keep an eye out for. But really, just block those people. They contribute nothing whatsoever. Somebody asks, does Vosh count as a patsock? And we had a little discussion of this. No. I mean, he does the patriotism thing in a way, but most of who we call the patsocks, it's a different sort of, more of an anti-West, pro-imperialist, fascistic thing that masquerades as Marxist and anti-imperialist, whereas Vosh is more on the pro-USA side of it. So they're both making an error of siding with a bourgeoisie, but they're siding with different ones. And so Vosh, we came up with in the chat, he's more on the Radlib side than the Patsock side. There are some of the same errors, but they wind up in different camps. Happy to elaborate as needed, but gonna move on. So let's see. Somebody says, I would say that S4A has done a lot of good work that I could go on to promote also the deprogram, and I can go far beyond the Marx 101 stuff. Yeah, so that's true. I was saying before that some people have invited me on their shows to like talk about something really specific. And, I haven't written like a book or something like that. So usually when people like do sort of a social media, like a book tour, basically, they're promoting some specific thing. Like they had a book that came out or a documentary that came out or something. The way that I look at S4A, this is just a grassroots channel where I set out to do a lot more reading and to move beyond where the US left was at that point, and to try to, help raise the bar and bring other people along, because I knew that other people wanted to go beyond the memes, and beyond the existing YouTube channels and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to, again, make yet another path towards a better place for the US left. But like I said, I'm another commenter. I'm another grassroots person that has been out there fighting the fight, marching in the streets from time to time. Like I've engaged in what I've engaged in. And I'm just here, with some experience trying to raise the bar. But we do audiobooks. I comment on other videos. It's not like I have, done some major work. That said, collectively, 200 plus audiobooks is not nothing. And, I can talk about those experiences. Sometimes people want to have me on to like talk about something really particular. And I'm like, Honestly, S4A is aimed more at increasing the general knowledge and theoretical background of the movement. I have my interests as far as a specialization, but the amount of time I'm able to put into a specialization is limited by the time that I put into the general stuff, which seems to be, gaining ground with people. And I think that that general education does really need to happen in order for people to have intelligent conversations about strategy or anything else beyond that. So I think, we will eventually maybe hit a point where the US left is ready for that next step. I don't think we're there yet. So hence the channel continues to primarily focus on general education, and I break off in other topics like as allowed. But yes, as far as going beyond the Marx 101 stuff, happy to do it. Happy to do it. Really, because we don't have much time to waste. All this is way overdue in my opinion. So yeah. All right, what else do we have going on in the chat? Do I know people who are fascist? So yes. I mean, I've been doing this for kind of a long time. I have felt like the US has been going closer and closer to fascism, like in a really overt way for quite a while. I've been doing a lot of stuff since the Bush-Cheney years, which were a pretty marked departure. Like we were already 2 decades into neoliberalism at that point, and the U.S. throughout its entire history, I mean, it's a genocidal colonial settler project. It is like the world standard of imperialism in the post-World War II period. So, I mean, there's a lot of deeply right-wing, violent, and quasi-fascist things about the US. It is going more and more overtly towards just wearing that fascism on its sleeve nowadays. Like the US for a long time has sort of pretended to be anti-fascist, but they only do that in the context of, both fascism and communism are extremes, and we're not extreme. We promote, social democratic class peace. But of course, that mask came off quite a while ago. And it started really coming off with Reagan. That was widespread, clear, open articulation of a new corporate vision of the United States. Obviously, there had been right-wing politics in the United States prior to that. There was always like the John Birch Society, whatever, even more mainstream in the Republican Party, like Nixon and the silent majority and all that. But as far as unveiling like the neoliberal, counter-revolutionary, anti-social democratic project, that was Reagan. And the whole thing was, orchestrated like a marketing campaign, like corporate America. This was something of a departure from politics at that time. And so you get into Bush too. Remember, Bush Sr. was Reagan's vice president, and then one-term president after him. Then you had 8 years of Bill Clinton, right-wing Democrat, and then Bush Cheney, 9/11, War on Terror, closes out with the 2008 global financial meltdown. So to me, I was looking in the 90s at like, hey, I think the United States is heading more towards open fascism at this point. Of course, no more USSR, nobody really to stand in the way. China was still pretty economically weak relative to how they are today. So that really wasn't in the picture at that point in the 90s. So the US decided to just, hey, let's take this thing out for a spin. When the Bush-Cheney people got in, they called it full spectrum dominance for a new American century. That was their vision. I would call that definite leap towards fascism, if not quite there. But you look at what happened at the end of the Bush-Cheney years. The Minutemen, that whole border thing that was going on from like 2006, 7, 8. People were talking about, the Minutemen were like this fascist militia in a country with multiple fascist militias, but that was one that was like sidling up with the Republican Party. And then the Tea Party. That was the rebranding of the Republican Party in this sort of faux populist, libertarian, crypto-fash sort of thing, because the Bush-Cheney, wing of the Republican Party, the quote, respectable wing of the Republican Party, they used up every last ounce of credibility that they had during the Bush-Cheney years. So they needed a rebranding. And then, of course, John McCain did not do so well in 2008. So this Tea Party became like the shock troops of the new Republican Party. It directly was the predecessor to what we know today as MAGA, which really just started as the Tea Party. Um, so anyway, do I know people who are fascist? Yeah, in fact, I've been talking about it for about 25 years. Very few people were willing to listen, even, in the last 15 years, like since Bush Cheney. So, you know, people in the US don't have a good understanding of what fascism is. And, a lot of right wingers think that fascism by definition is something other people do. Like, no matter what views they have, no matter how overtly fascist they are, they could be copied word for word out of, Italian politics of the 1920s and 30s. It's still, to them, somehow not fascist. They can be anti-vax, which has a long-standing history of being tied to extreme right-wing movements, etc. They can have every last one of the things, be anti-feminist, anti-LGBTQ+, on, anti-trade union, anti-socialist, but no, somehow they're still not fascist. It's this massive cognitive dissonance that, slash willful ignorance, that most likely will be the start of something truly hideous, which I think is now coming out with people like Trump who are openly egging it on. I think that we saw the growth of the far right under Trump. I mean, he really encourages it and acts as a leader and a cheerleader for it in a way that, we just haven't seen in a long time. And obviously the Democrats and the rest of the Republicans, they're out to maintain US empire, which is bad for the working people who live here. It's not democratic at all. People don't have control over their living conditions, over the economy, over their working conditions. And all of that creates the background for discontent and for people being upset. But to spin it in the particular direction of, well, what do we do about it? That sort of fascist agitation. I think that what we're seeing now out of MAGA is the organized, it's a movement in a way that, Bush and Cheney, they were doing a lot of far right things as far as expanding the US empire very violently, etc. But they didn't have the mass movement. That's where Tea Party into MAGA comes in. So anyway, the rest of the comment was obviously all of us have anti-fascist work to do, but now as capitalism is in crisis, people tend towards more reactionary or radical ideas. So I guess my point of all of this, talking about this long history of the US walking towards fascism for decades, yes, I didn't really know what to do about it then at the beginning 25 years ago. No one would listen. And now we're starting, Antifa is a household word as of the last 5 years. That's a positive thing. People need to understand also, Antifa is 95% research. It is 5%, showing up at demonstrations and stuff like that. 95% of it is doing research on the far right. We'll be reading some articles from that realm today. But yeah, anti-fascist work, hugely important. Don't let the fact that the Democrats sometimes disingenuously denounce the Republican Party, don't take that to mean that there's not a real problem here. It's just that all the Democrats are going to do at best is try to fundraise off of it. They're not going to do anything about it. So anyway, that's the situation we're in. We have to build the movement that can end capitalism. I mean, fascism is an extension of capitalism in crisis. We have to end this whole thing. No one's going to do it for us. That's why I keep saying the US left has to detach from the Democratic Party, excuse me, and all capitalist parties. I'm going to take a sip here. You just simply can't get the kind of organizing we need going within the Democratic Party. It's not possible. So we have to build up other organizations. The Green Party is the minimum next step for people who have Dem exited. You cannot just merely drop out and call it good. You have to organize. So, like I said, minimum you can do, Register as a green with your state. That helps the party in a number of ways. Contact the local party. Say, hi, I am a socialist. I would like to help. What can I do? Whether it's them or whether it's another org, you know what organizations love? They love people saying, hi, I am interested in helping out. What can I help you out with? They love that. They might need to get to know you first or something. There may be like an orientation process, but they need people. So, just go do that, please, because we can't have people just, oh, I tried working with the Democrats and then I dropped out. Well, no. You need to get in there and build something that we can fight the Democrats and the Republicans and the Libertarians and all the other fucking right-wing shitheads that are organized in this country. They're organized and they're taking everything apart. We need to end this entire thing. Anyway, on that note, I'll come back to the chat in a bit. This thing about how can we navigate MAGA family members and things like that is a question. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe people in the comments can have, more of a discussion about that, but I got to move on to some other stuff right now. So let us start with a little bit of COVID stuff. Actually, first of all, let's start with some general disease material. Here's monkeypox. Yeah, that's not going away. This is the 7-day rolling average. If you will note, it is going up and up. This is daily confirmed cases, not cumulative cases. This is the number of new cases in a day. Note that that line is going up, not down. And it has been for over a month now. That is a bad sign. And the messaging that I'm seeing about it, just before I started the stream, actually, there was a article that popped up, how to protect yourself from monkeypox. No. See, when you have highly contagious diseases like this, like COVID, the entire society has to protect itself. It cannot be down to an individual. Okay, that's what the phrase public health means. There's a whole discipline, public health. That's what it means. It means population health. It means protecting a whole society. But everything I'm seeing about monkeypox is just like COVID. They've shifted the burden from society onto the individual. You just can't successfully combat a highly contagious disease like this. So that's monkeypox. It's bad. By the way, not going to do the whole article, but if you have pet animals and you have any suspicion that you've been exposed to monkeypox, you need to not handle your animals. Go and look that up. I can't remember the title of the article offhand, but basically, like COVID can pass to some animals, for instance, cats, monkeypox can be transmitted to a lot of animals, and then it can mutate, pass back to humans. The animals can become a viral reservoir. So that's not good. Anyway, checking in with COVID. Here's where we are. This is from biobot.io, biobot.io/data. And you can see that we are currently in a sustained surge that is about as high as Delta or the winter of 2020 into 2021, or the initial, March, April 2020 surge. We're in surge number 4, and then there's a 5th surge, which is Omicron, which really stands on its own. And we're still in the post-Omicron sort of, people have some residual immunity and things like that. It's also not the winter anymore. People are in better health. There's a number of things. In January, December, February, the most amount of people die just naturally. People are weaker in that time. So you would expect to have a big surge at that time. Anyway, for us to be in spring, going into summer starts next week, and to be having this kind of a sustained surge, that's a really bad sign. But what's this being fueled by? It's being fueled by Omicron being a fast mutating. It's highly contagious, highly transmissible. So it's being passed around a lot, and it's replicating, and it mutates. So we had BA.1, that's the huge spike. That was original Omicron. Then there was BA.2, then BA.2.1.2, BA.3, BA.4, BA.5. BA.4 and BA.5 are coming in now. So let's zoom in on this graph and we'll look at just the last 6 weeks. So you can see very steady, actually starting to trend up slightly. It's been pretty flat for a while, but flat at relatively high numbers. So that's not good. Is it going to go up or down from here? I would put my money on it's going to keep going up. So if we look at the, excuse me, monitoring by region, we can see that why the surge has been going on in a kind of sustained way is that yellow gold line is the Northeast US. That got hit first, and there was a really big outbreak of BA.2 and BA.2.1.2. So that is now starting to taper off, but the 3 other regions have increased. So that's why it's been flat, is the Northeast has come down because people in the Northeast have caught BA.2 and the other forms of BA.2, and they have temporary immunity. The thing about Omicron is the potential for reinfection is greater than with most other strains. So compared to Delta, for instance, and I was listening to the source on this is Dr. Peter Hotez, who helped design one of the vaccines. He was talking about how Delta and earlier strains from 2021 and 2020 cause a more robust immune response. They stir up your immune system to a greater extent, and then that effect lasts for longer in your body. You get longer protection. Omicron, although it can really mess you up in the short term, it doesn't do the same thing for your immune system. It doesn't cause an immune response that is as lasting. Therefore, the potential for getting reinfected with a different subvariant within Omicron, or even with the same subvariant of Omicron, is much higher than it was for earlier strains of COVID. So we're seeing cases of people who are getting reinfected after a month or 2 months or 3 months with BA.2 or some subvariant within the BA.2 family. So just having had COVID, as I'm sure many of you already realize, is not a guarantee that you're not going to get it again in a couple of months, all the more so with these newer strains. So that's something to be aware of. For now, the Northeast strain is in decline, or we should say the Northeast outbreak is in decline, possibly because people have just had it. But what's happening? Well, look down at the bottom at the Omicron variant overview. We see that BA.1 is extinct, 0.0% across the entire United States. That's how quickly it came and went. So as far as getting, the Omicron booster shot, probably already largely outdated. Now, there are going to be some things in there that will be more helpful, even for BA.4, BA.5, et cetera, because there are mutations that they have in common. Mutations being structural differences, structural characteristics of the virus that it'll have in common. But this thing is moving so fast, even getting the booster shot, which get it, by the way, if you haven't gotten it already, it's going to give you a lot of protection. It's still behind the curve. What we need to do is stop transmission because BA.1 came in 6 months later, it's completely gone. So what do we have? We have BA.2 and BA.2.1.2. That is roughly 50-50, depending on, across the entire United States, it's 44% BA.2, 52% of the other. But look at the fourth column, BA.4 and BA.5. It's single digits, pretty much everywhere except the West, where it's not even 1% yet. Well, that's on the way up, not down. So why am I betting that this is going to go up? I mean, that the overall curve is going to go up? Because those are new. People haven't had them yet. So even if we're seeing some stalling or even decline on the BA.2 curve, which is basically what you're looking at in that graph, we haven't really seen the BA.4 or BA.5 effects yet. So I would suspect that it's going to stay at the current level. And then as BA.4 and BA.5 come in, people will either get reinfected or infected for the first time with that, and then the overall curve will go up. That would be my guess based on everything that we've seen so far. If it did something different, it would be kind of an anomaly. So anyway, you look at that BA.4, BA.5 across the entire United States is 3.1% of the overall COVID load. Bear in mind, though, as it says on the screen, That is as of May 25th, so it's probably closer to like 10% now. It takes a while to sequence the variants, so maybe it's 8 or 9%, whatever. It's at a low number and on the way up, meaning it's coming in and we have not seen anywhere near its full effects. So at some point, BA.4 and BA.5 are going to push BA.2 and its siblings out, and then we will have the BA.4 and BA.5 surge, and then we'll have whatever comes after that. You know why? Because this thing doesn't stop unless you stop it. It doesn't stop on its own. You can get reinfected. If it was a thing where once you got it, you couldn't get reinfected for 2 years, that would be one thing. But that's not the world we're living in. That's not the virus we're dealing with. So the last thing I want to mention about COVID before we move on is when we think about mortality, I have tried to really, hold on, I need to sip here. I'm trying to motor through, but there are limits. I've tried to really, especially in the last few COVID update videos that I've done, emphasize the distinction between the acute phase of COVID, like the first month, and then long COVID, months 2 through like 12 or 15, because there's not necessarily a relationship. If you get hospitalized during your acute phase, that first month, which is when most people, quote, die of COVID, like you get the pneumonia, your lungs, you can't get any oxygen in your body, etc., you die. Or, I mean, that's the most common acute cause. However, while it's doing that damage to your lungs, it's also damaging your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your brain, your immune system, and so on and so on. You can find details in the previous COVID update videos that we've done. So we've got the acute phase and we've got long COVID, which causes long-range disabilities for a year or more, even if your acute phase wasn't that bad. If it was bad, you're much more likely to have bad long COVID. But even if you didn't, you could have been asymptomatic in your first month, and you could still get long COVID. There's a significant chance of it. But now we need to also add in a third factor, and this is a study from the Lancet Regional Health Europe. This is a national cohort study from Estonia. Title is Long-Term Mortality Following SARS Coronavirus 2 Infection, a national cohort study from Estonia. So essentially, we'll read the little summary. We need to think about long COVID a little bit differently, I guess. This is a third thing. So you get the possibility of acute phase death and injury. Then you have the long COVID possibilities of being disabled, unable to work. 59% of people who had neurological symptoms during their long COVID were unable to return to work, for example. We wonder why things are so screwed up in the economy right now. And in the labor market, that's not being discussed. It's being swept under the rug. Long COVID, major factor. But we don't only have to think about being disabled for 12 to 15 months because, again, COVID causes multi-system inflammation throughout many of your major organs. Like I said before, your immune system, heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, brain, and so forth, anywhere that has a lot of ACE2 receptors, for starters. This can cause death. So, summary here, background, the objective of this study was to describe 12-month mortality. So that's mortality is death, and then mortality in a 12-month period following SARS coronavirus 2 infection, compared with a reference population with no history of being infected with the coronavirus. So they did, as their methods, the nationwide cohort study using electronic healthcare data on SARS coronavirus 2 RNA positive cases. And the sample size there, the N equals 66,287, it's a pretty good sample size. And reference group subject, so the reference group was 255,000 people, with linkage to SARS coronavirus 2 testing and death records. The findings where people infected with SARS coronavirus 2 had more than 3 times the risk of dying over the following year compared with those who remained uninfected. Short-term mortality, which is defined as up to 5 weeks post-infection, was significantly higher among the COVID-19 group than in the reference group. For COVID-19 cases aged 60 years or older, increased mortality persisted until the end of the first year after infection and was related to increased risk for cardiovascular, cancer, respiratory system diseases, and other causes of death. And finally, the interpretation. I'm going to take another sip here. My throat is just not cooperating. Interpretation. Increased risk of death from SARS coronavirus 2 is not limited to the acute illness. And so now what we have to think about after the acute phase is not just disability, but also increased mortality. SARS coronavirus 2 infection carries a substantially increased mortality in the following 12 months. This excess death mainly occurs in older people and is driven by a broad array of causes of death. So, as I've said before, if you make it out of the hospital with COVID, it's not like, I feel so good, that hospital stay really rested me up. No, if you were sick enough to have been hospitalized for COVID, you're in rough shape. That virus didn't just hurt your lungs, it hurt most of your major organs. And it left you with a crippled immune system as well. Because we did do a study, still waiting for more studies on this, but according to one study, SARS basically wiped out naive T cells, which are arguably the foundation of your immune system. So, people may have seen the Justin Bieber thing that he came down with shingles. Younger people, shingles is basically when the chickenpox virus, after you get it, it just lives in your body. When the chickenpox virus resurfaces. But when it comes back, it's not just, itchy and stuff. It lives in your nerves, and the nerves where it reactivates can become paralyzed. If you get it in your face, it can cause facial paralysis and bad stuff. You don't want it. It can be caused, in the pre-COVID era by stress. Like people who are under a lot of stress can have a recurrence of chickenpox, again, called shingles. Usually it's seen in older people whose bodies are, starting to go. But again, it can happen in younger people. But you get, cases like Justin Bieber, for example. We don't, I think, know the cause of that. But, it's interesting. Is this a COVID-induced immune dysfunction response, possibly? I think that was one of the things that needs to be investigated. People should realize, who aren't really familiar with health stuff at all, if you go, just look up PubMed, P-U-B-M-E-D, huge site. There are so many studies coming out related to biological sciences all the time. You would never be able to read them all. I mean, it would just take, it's like a lifetime is published per day if you were to just sit down and read the things. But there are studies going on constantly about COVID and its effects on the body and how different diseases interact, etc. And what we know about COVID so far is it has wide-ranging effects on the entire body. Is it conceivable that it could cause a weakening of the immune system or some other interaction that makes, shingles more likely? Yeah, that's possible. Studies need to be done. They are being done, etc. But, I've just said so many times, you do not want this virus in your body. This is why we just keep finding out more and more things about it. It is not just the flu. So anyway, coming down from that, before we switch gears over to more of the far right stuff I wanted to get to today, let's check in with the chat, see what is going on there, because I'm way behind the chat. So, hey S4A, I was wondering if you're going to bother reacting to the Sanders versus Graham debate. Is that Bernie Sanders and Lindsey Graham? I know he's a lib, but man, I would still love watching Bernie point out the obvious to ruling class parasites that workers deserve something. I didn't see that. I guess I could. I like talking about Bernie because that was like the recent high water mark of the national U.S. left, or things generally to the left of the Democratic Party. There's a lot to be learned from that, and we need to move on from it, having incorporated those lessons as quickly as possible. So, there's a lot to say about Bernie Sanders and his many failings and his many mistakes that he knew he was making and made them anyway, leading a movement into the dead end of the Democratic Party that he knew was a dead end. So, yeah, maybe that's a good opportunity to just rehash some of that stuff. I actually hadn't heard about this at all. As far as, watching Bernie point out the obvious to ruling class parasites, Yeah, I mean, I think we need to do a lot better than Bernie Sanders, and quickly. That's what channels like S4A are out to do. We're trying to, when I talk about raising the bar, it's because we got to go beyond this stuff. People like Bernie Sanders are going to sell us out. We can't have that. We need to move on from the Democratic Party, and we need the tools, ideological tools, and knowledge-based tools of how to put together an organization, how to put together a movement. We need those tools, and we need to apply them like stat. So anyway, yeah, Bernie Sanders. It's I think good to comment on that stuff as far as pointing out that people need to move on. There are still way too many people clinging to Bernie and to the squad, and we need to pry those people away, as many as we can. Bring them around to the fact that what they're doing is never going to work. So Sanders came out with, oh, you mean during the debate, he came out with his 2016 pro working class energy. It felt like a break from Mr. Joe is a good friend of mine. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when Bernie rectifies his mistakes, which so far he still has not done. He still has not denounced the Democratic Party. He still, I mean, all of that stuff is still hanging. So if he's going to be taken seriously at all, he needs to come around and take the next step like the rest of us have done. So otherwise, I mean, he's a Pied Piper. I don't know what else to say. Uh, can I address the idea that the ruling class, quote, elites want depopulation? Can this claim be made scientifically within a Marxist analysis? Um, they don't seem to be trying real hard if that's what they want. I don't know. I don't know. It seems that there's evidence for the bourgeoisie wanting a reserve labor force. Yes, the more of us there are, I mean, more competitive. I mean, the less they can pay us, in other words. Um, in light of Roe v. Wade, arguments can be made that they want to increase the population. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, that's a right-wing thing that they've been pushing for a long time. Like you can hear that from Alex Jones, the depopulation agenda, all this stuff. Um, I mean, most of where that's coming from is like misreadings of environmental stuff and, basically any attack on US consumerism, basically. Like anything that says that people in the US have to stop consuming so much. They're like, it's a globalist plot to destroy the freest place in the world. So I think it's mostly tied up with stuff like that. I wouldn't really credit it. Anybody talking about that and thinks that they're a Marxist is making a major mistake, or they're in that Pat Sock sort of right wing faker camp. So, call them out, say, hey, look, you're making a mistake. If they, follow it up with more right wing talking points, be like, look, I think you got sucked in to some right wing bullshit, and I think you really need to look at it. So, yeah, yeah. To start, I mean, a lot of those people are you can't get too far with, but see what you can do. But I mean, don't spend your life on it. Let's see. So somebody else says, in my opinion, the climate crisis becoming 100% undeniable will lead to some eco-fascist elements thinking that they can keep on consuming if they sacrifice some edge towns and cities. Yeah, you'll see all kinds of stuff. Ice cream truck is coming by. Uh, it's what can I say? It's a noisy world. So yeah, as things get worse and worse, and the crises of capitalism become more and more undeniable, at least the effects of the crises become more and more undeniable, you're going to see more and more people jumping into the fray to try to propose solutions which aren't really solutions, that are still tied to capitalism, that are still basically right wing, that have fascist components, like just, build up the borders, or like, be more exclusionary or whatever. Um, yeah, you'll see a lot more of that as capitalism gets more and more into trouble, because fascism is capitalism in crisis. It's fundamentally what it does. And people get confused sometimes because fascists will use some kinds of radical rhetoric or some kinds of revolutionary sounding rhetoric. Go look at the Understanding Right Wing Social Movements playlist at S4A because they've been doing this for a century. This is what Mussolini's original fascists did. The whole point is to lead people away from socialism. So it's taking radical revolutionary energy and spinning it towards support for the status quo. That's what it's all about. That's what fascism is all about. So people who get sucked in by that and thinking that there is some red-brown alliance possible, it's not. They're just getting suckered by the, little candy that the fascists dangle in front of them, like out of the van. But, it's a scam. It's a con. They're trying to get you on board a thing that is not going to take you to socialist town. It's going to take you towards, some fascist eco village. You don't want that. Not to say, by the way, that all eco villages are fascist. Yeah, you'll see as things get worse, more and more solutions, which, if they're not socialist, are going to still be tied to capitalism and will be hideously reactionary in some way. So keep your eyes open. And yes, they pretend to have some radical elements. That's a fundamental feature of fascism. Point it out to people. Don't fall for it, and help other people not to fall for it. So, holy shit. What do I think of Jimmy Dore for president? Yeah, so fucking Mint Press News was tweeting today. Let me go find it because I retweeted it. Would you vote for Jimmy Dore in 2024 as a presidential candidate? And I retweeted that with a simple message. What kind of sick asshole would tweet this? And that's about my response to it. Why in the world would anyone say something like that? My God. No, Jimmy Dore has been on the wrong side of a lot of shit for a number of years now. To be honest, the audiobook of What Is to Be Done at S4A is tainted by a Jimmy Dore reference right before, I think like the week before he did that Boogaloo Boy, not just interview, but like PR stunt. And I was like, okay, we're done. And I had to put a big disclaimer in the pinned comment. The last thing I supported that Jimmy Dore was pushing was Force the Vote. I thought that actually made a lot of sense. And then right after that, he started doing all this opportunist right-wing shit, particularly with the Boogaloo Boys. I mean, he had been cultivating kind of like a libertarian audience for a long time, which, again, this is another reason that I'm doing the channel. Why we need to raise the bar is so that people can call opportunism opportunism. We need to raise the bar so that people like Jimmy Dore don't gain the kind of traction that they do. People who don't bother to read the theory, they don't bother to understand the history. And, it's just more petty bourgeois or like whatever the fuck Jimmy Dore is at this point. It's more not actually socialist stuff. We need to get beyond this at this point. And I think if he ran for president, it would be on the Movement for a People's Party, useless party. Just a watered down Green Party. There's no need for it. And they've just been collecting donations for years. And what have they done? It's like a podcast grift. That's what it is. I don't know why people are taken in by this. It's like people who just are on a very specific subset of Twitter and listen to the Jimmy Dore channel, follow that shit. The rest of us that don't operate within that little like groupthink zone, it just looks batshit. So I don't know, but that's what I think about it. Yeah. I've heard the U.S. energy policy and military policy be described as ecocide. That's certainly, George W. Bush had that like stupid fake accent that he would do to try to sound folksy. And so when he said war on terror, it would sound like war on Terra, like Terra, like sometimes used as a name for planet Earth. So that was kind of a thing for a while. People would like meme in the 2000s was like the war on Terra, which is, apt. So somebody says, that's great. Guess I'll share with the stream that I'm currently homesick from work with COVID-19 due to working in a service vehicle for a week, training a new employee that is a COVID denier and anti-masker, anti-vaxxer Trumper. First time catching COVID, angry face. Yeah, I'd be pissed too. So, I guess just to touch on that article we were looking at, where a feature of long COVID is increased mortality, increased risk of death. Why? Why is there increased mortality? Because it just ravages your vital organs. That's why. It leaves you significantly weaker across the board. As they said, it was multi-cause stuff, cardiovascular problems. It's just, it does a number on you. It causes massive inflammation throughout your major organs. So, yeah, it's not good. That's what we know of it, like in the first year, and particularly in older people, who've lived a full life. They've sustained a lot of, just damage that you accrue through 60 years of walking around in this environment. I mean, like, specifically this polluted environment. I just mean, it's hard living on Earth, breathing atmosphere, and all the stuff that the body has to contend with. It's a miracle we live as long as we do. But yeah, being worn down by a virus and trying to cope with all that inflammation on top of it, it just makes it that much more difficult to do the basic, self-repair and self-healing that is required for staying healthy into your later years. I'm sure that we will keep finding out things about increased mortality even in younger people. So anyway, and again, in that study, this was not like a low risk either. It was significantly increased mortality in the following year. So even if you make it past that first month or two, well, don't break out the party hats until you make it after your first year of catching COVID, particularly if you're older, because you just don't know. It could, wear you down to the point where you wind up dying a year after catching it. So. Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you got COVID. I was really mad the first time I got COVID because I'd been really strict. And then I went to this one place and it was just packed and nobody was wearing masks. And I'm positive I caught it there. And I was just so pissed because I had just not gone in this one place. I wouldn't have gotten it. And that's all it takes. That's all it takes. And I had a mask on, but it clearly wasn't enough. You can get it in your eyes and stuff. And I don't know, I mean, I'll never know exactly how I got it, but uh, it's infuriating because people act like it's nothing, and it's definitely not nothing. Let's see. There's somebody asking, can I introduce you to socialism, communism, and tell you why it's a better ideology than the one we currently have? Um, Socialism is a working class ideology. Capitalism is a ruling class capitalist ideology. Capitalism is not in your interest if you're a working person. That would be the very short answer. Head over to the channel. Head over to the YouTube channel. YouTube.com/socialism for all. If you want to know more, but not in this stream today, unfortunately. But yeah, and they say that they're here to learn. That's great. Welcome. I'm glad you're here to learn. But today, go over to the channel, look at some of the recommended lists, whatever, or, do some comments. We can, but listen first. I think that would be probably the best thing to do. Understand that if you haven't been taught much about socialism, there's a lot you don't know. So whatever you think about socialism, understand first off the bat, probably what you think you know is wrong. And so just clear some room for learning accurate information about it first before you make up your mind at all. Unfortunately, I get other stuff I want to cover today, so yeah. All right. There's a lot of discussion of that, which I'm kind of scrolling through. All right. Let's come back to the chat in a minute because I'm trying to catch up with a new question and it looks like a lot of back and forth. So let's go on to an article. Haven't really gotten anything yet. And you know what it's looking like? We've been going for a while on the stream. I'm gonna have to do another stream soon to get to most of these articles, honestly. But let's do the NLRB stuff. I'm probably actually not going to get to the right-wing stuff today. Let's do the NLRB stuff first. Talking about socialism. Well, these are some of your rights to organize as a working person under capitalism. In a socialist society, this would be different, but this is what we've got right now. And the labor movement has been in decline for a long time in the US. There are a number of reasons for this, from McCarthyism to, labor law like Taft-Hartley being stacked way towards the employer's favor. Basically, the private sector labor movement has been gutted over the last 50 or 60 years and is extraordinarily weak right now. That reminds me, by the way. So the Fed raising rates today. Before we even get to this NLRB stuff, let me check, because at the time that I started the stream, there was not information yet about the interest rates being raised by the Fed. Let's see what's going on with that, because different banks and things like that have been trying to predict, how much is the Fed gonna hike rates today. And I don't know if that information is out yet. But basically, a lot of people are saying that they're walking sort of a fine line of triggering a recession. We are, I guess, now officially in a bear market. Anyway, I'm not seeing it, so we're gonna have to come back to that. But that is one of the news stories today. Maybe somebody can, just found it. So how higher Fed rates will affect Americans' finances and tackle inflation. Federal Reserve's largest interest rate hike since 1994 is meant to attack high inflation. So they're talking about how wage growth has been too big, and that's one of the reasons for this. Boy, is that not a good... I mean, wages are not nearly high enough. So this is why we need rational economic planning, not the sloppy market anarchy and chaos of capitalism. Anyway, to summarize this quickly, and then I'll get to the union rights thing. Breaking, the Federal Reserve intensified its bid to tame high inflation by raising its key interest rate 0.75 of a point, the largest hike since 1994. It also signaled more large rate increases to come, raising the risk of a recession. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell delivers a news briefing after the central bank raised its key interest rate by 0.75 of a point, etc. It's ramping up its drive to tighten credit and slow growth with inflation at a 4-decade high of 8.6%. Borrowing costs have already risen sharply across much of the U.S. economy, with the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate topping 6%. Wow. We already have a housing crisis. There are more empty houses than homeless people, but we have a housing crisis. Why socialism? Because capitalism does this shit. Because capitalism doesn't work. Okay? And we need to move forward. We need to shed the capitalist nature of production currently, and we need to move on to a worker-centered economy. This isn't working, what we're doing now. Okay? You can do it just by eliminating things that don't work. The current system does not work. So anyway, that's how much it raised it today. Apparently, the stock market is rallying. The stock market has been falling for quite a while. This is helping the stock market. That's all they really fucking care about. They don't care about what's going on with people. They're saying wages are too high, for fuck's sake. That's how much they care about what's going on with the average working person. Anyway, coming back to the NLRB here. We'll maybe cover the Fed rate hike when we have more information on it in a future stream or video. So here's the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board. This is the federal agency tasked with basically overseeing industrial relations, disputes, and things like that. This is their page on your rights, employee rights. So starting here, employees covered by the National Labor Relations Act are afforded certain rights to join together to improve their wages and working conditions with or without a union. Union activity. Employees have the right to attempt to form a union where none currently exists, or to decertify a union that has lost the support of employees. So you have the legal right to form a union. You can't be fired for that. People do get fired for it, but if you do, it's unfair and it's illegal, and you can be awarded back pay if you file a complaint about it, and the NLRB rules that the employer violated your rights. So that's a good thing to know. That said, when you're trying to organize, we put up a bunch of organizing guides on the channel. Be careful, because it's better to stick it out and carefully try to organize than, get fired, even if you do get back pay. It's sort of a consolation prize, but it's not really the desired outcome. So you can also decertify a union. Now, this is not every union is great. And in some cases, employees might even feel like the union is blocking their ability to do more effective organizing if it's a really bad union that is just not representing them well. So trying to decertify can be difficult. It can be done, though. So anyway, you also have the right to do that without reprisal. So examples of employee rights include forming or attempting to form a union in your workplace. 2, joining a union, whether the union is recognized by your employer or not. So just because you formed a union does not mean that your employer has recognized it. They are required to engage in good faith negotiations. Do they always do this? No. But anyway, there's, as I mentioned before, things are really stacked toward the employer's rights. That's not to say that employees have zero rights. You do have some rights. But you have to understand that employers get away with a lot of shit, like a lot. So, the more organized you and your fellow workers at your workplace are, and the more capable you are of doing job actions, it doesn't have to be a complete walkout, but just doing job actions, the faster you may be able to persuade your employer to recognize you and negotiate and all that kind of stuff. 3, you have the right to assist a union in organizing your fellow employees. 4, you have the right not to do any of these things. You can refuse to do any or all of them. And you have the right to be fairly represented by a union. Continuing, activity outside a union. Employees who are not represented by a union also have rights under the NLRA. So whether or not you have, formed a recognized union, that you've had an NLRB election and all that kind of stuff, if you are engaging in union-like activity, which they call concerted activity, you also have rights under the National Labor Relations Act, which is basically the legislation that paved the way for the NLRB. So specifically, the National Labor Relations Board protects the rights of employees to engage in concerted activity, which is when 2 or more employees take action for their mutual aid or protection regarding terms and conditions of employment. We're going to see some examples of that in a bit. A single employee may also engage in protected concerted activity if they are acting on the authority of other employees, bringing group complaints to the employer's attention, trying to induce group action, or seeking to prepare for group action. A few examples of protected concerted activities are: 1, 2 or more employees addressing their employer about improving their pay. 2, 2 or more employees discussing work-related issues beyond pay, such as safety concerns, with each other. So that's protected. You cannot be, docked for that in any way. That's protected. 3, an employee speaking to an employer on behalf of 1 or more coworkers about improving workplace conditions. More information, including descriptions of actual concerted activity cases, is available on the Protected Concerted Activity page. That's what I said. We're going to look at that in a minute. So who is covered? Most employees in the private sector are covered by the NLRA. However, the Act specifically excludes individuals who are: 1, employed by federal, state, or local government; 2, employed as agricultural laborers; 3, employed in the domestic service of any person or family in a home; 4, I can count, employed by a parent or spouse. I got distracted. 5, employed as an independent contractor. 6, employed as a supervisor. Supervisors who have been discriminated against for refusing to violate the NLRA may be covered, though. 7, employed by an employer subject to the Railway Labor Act, such as railroads and airlines. And 8, employed by any other person who is not an employer as defined in the NLRA. More information is available on the jurisdictional standards page. So that's important to know, too. There are a number of cases where you may be an employee, but under one of these particular situations where you're not covered by the NLRA. in which case you may not be actually protected by that concerted activity clause that we described above. So in that case, you may not actually have any legal rights. If you want to organize in that case, you will be relying exclusively on your ability to carry out job actions, of the strength of your union, because there will be no legal remedy for you. You have to basically get your employer, by the sensitive parts of their body. And that is the only way that you're going to be able to successfully do your unionizing. So something to keep in mind. And there are also, I would mention, actually, I'm not sure if it's going to get into it. Let's take a look. So it may cover this on the fifth and final screen, but there are also some state equivalents of the NLRA that may cover state employees and other stuff like that, as well as other businesses that may not be covered by these federal guidelines. So just be aware of that. Look up, is there a state, not just the State Department of Labor or something like that, but a state labor relations agency. Because that may give you rights if the NLRA doesn't. Anyway, continuing. Federal contractors are private contractors who work for the federal government under NLRB jurisdiction. In addition, all federal contractors are required by the Department of Labor to post a notice of employee rights under the NLRA. Religious organizations. The board will not assert jurisdiction over employees of a religious organization who are involved in effectuating the religious purpose of the organization, such as teachers in church-operated schools. The board has asserted jurisdiction over employees who work in the operations of a religious organization that did not have a religious character, such as a healthcare institution. So anything involved in, preaching the gospel, that's not going to be covered, but something, maybe if you're the operations of a religious organization that, so if you were the janitor of the church, you would be an employee of a religious organization involved in effectuating the religious purpose. So in that sense, you may not be covered, actually. So it's not necessarily the profession, but again, check it out. Finally, Indian tribes. The board asserts jurisdiction over the commercial enterprises owned and operated by Indian tribes, even if they are located on a tribal reservation. But the board does not assert jurisdiction over tribal enterprises that carry out traditional tribal or governmental functions. The following employers are excluded from NLRB jurisdiction by statute or regulation. 1. Federal, state, and local governments, including public schools, libraries, and parks, Federal Reserve banks, and wholly owned government corporations. 2. Employers who employ only agricultural laborers, those engaged in farming operations that cultivate or harvest agricultural commodities or prepare commodities for delivery. 3. Employers subject to the Railway Labor Act, such as interstate, railroads, and airlines. So now we go on to examples of protected concerted activity, just to give you an idea of what people have done on the job to try to improve conditions as a group, just as individuals, that is considered protected here. So, as the blurb says, the law we enforce gives employees the right to act together to try to improve their pay and working conditions, with or without a union. If employees are fired, suspended, or otherwise penalized for taking part in protected group activity, the National Labor Relations Board will fight to restore what was unlawfully taken away. These rights were written into the original 1935 National Labor Relations Act and have been upheld in numerous decisions by appellate courts and by the U.S. Supreme Court. Recent cases involving a range of industries and employers are highlighted on the map below. Hover over a pin for details. So here's an example from Lakewood, Washington. A construction contractor fired 5 employees after several of them appeared in a YouTube video complaining of hazardous working conditions. Following an investigation, the NLRB regional office issued complaint. As a hearing opened, the case settled with the workers receiving full back pay and declining reinstatement. So a win, although they were laid off for a while. The employees, terminated. Anyway, the employees, all immigrants from El Salvador, learned that they were building concrete foundations at a former Superfund site, that's a polluted site, and worried that the soil that they were handling was contaminated with arsenic and other toxins. They also said that they were required to wear badges indicating that they'd been trained to handle hazardous materials, when in fact, the badges belonged to other workers and they had never been trained. 3 of the employees took their concerns public in a YouTube video posted July 21st, 2008. Speaking in Spanish, they hid their faces in shadow in an attempt to avoid retaliation. However, within 10 days, the 3 who appeared in the video and 2 others who were close to them had all lost their jobs with Rain City contractors. Through the ensuing months, according to charges filed with the agency's Seattle office, the employer continued to threaten and interrogate other employees, warning them not to talk about working conditions with outsiders. Again, that is their right. Following an investigation of the charges, the NLRB regional director determined that the YouTube video was protected. Excuse me. Because the employees voiced concerns about safety in the workplace and the public airing of their complaints did not lose the Act's protection because they accurately described their concerns about working conditions. On behalf of the NLRB General Counsel, the director issued a complaint calling for a hearing before an administrative law judge. As the hearing began in June of 2009, NLRB attorneys were prepared to play the video and to present evidence that the employer had been fined for numerous violations of state law regarding the same concerns as those raised by the workers. However, on the second morning of testimony, Rain City contractors agreed to settle the case by giving all 5 workers full back pay for the period from their discharges to the settlement date. The workers declined reinstatement. They did not want their jobs back. Another example, Omaha, Nebraska, meat processing and packaging plant. On March 12, 2014, the board affirmed an NLRB administrative law judge's earlier ruling that Greater Omaha Packing, a Nebraska-based meat processing and packaging plant, unlawfully discharged employees after they engaged in protected concerted activity. In April 2012, a group of employees walked off the production line to protest the speed of the line and other working conditions, and thereafter met with the plant manager. That evening, the employees again met with the plant manager to discuss their compensation and other matters. 1 month later, when the employer learned that another work stoppage was planned, 3 employees were separately called into the office and dismissed. The employees filed a charge with the NLRB's office in Overland Park, Kansas, which investigated and issued a complaint. An NLRB administrative law judge found that the employer had unlawfully discharged the employees in retaliation for engaging in concerted protected activity. The employer appealed the judge's order, leading to the board's decision affirming the judge's ruling and requiring the employer to reinstate the employees with full back pay and benefits. We'll do a couple of other examples here, but hopefully this is giving you the idea of what kind of stuff. Oops, wrong file. This will give you an idea of what kind of stuff is covered. So Chicago, Illinois. Hold on one second. All right. Long-term acute care hospital. RML Specialty Hospital Incorporated, the employer, is a long-term acute care hospital in Chicago. It unlawfully suspended and discharged an employee for submitting a grievance concerning management's treatment of employees who returned to work from medical leave. Following a thorough investigation, the Chicago NLRB regional office issued complaint. Prior to hearing, the employee and the employer reached a settlement agreement which provided full back pay to the employee. An employee began discussing his concerns with a coworker regarding the employer's failure to accommodate their medical restrictions after they returned from their respective medical leaves. As the months passed and their working conditions did not improve, one of the employees spoke to his pastor. The pastor told him that he had recently heard a representative from Arise Chicago, a workers' rights center, speak at a conference about workers' rights and suggested he go there and see if they could help. An Arise representative assisted these employees with drafting the grievances, which they presented to the employer. After submitting his grievance to the employer, one employee was fired. The Arise representative who assisted him with drafting the grievance had previously attended an NLRB outreach event hosted by the Chicago regional office. He informed the employee that he had a right to act concerted with his coworker, and the employer could not retaliate against him. The Arise representative helped him file a charge against the employer. Following an investigation of this charge, the regional director of the Chicago NLRB regional office determined that the employee had engaged in protected concerted activities with his coworker, and that there was reasonable cause to believe that the employer terminated the employee in retaliation of his protected activity of filing the grievance. On behalf of the NLRB General Counsel, the director issued a complaint calling for a hearing before an administrative law judge. Prior to the hearing, the employee and RML Hospital, Inc. reached a settlement agreement providing the employee with his full back pay. The employee declined reinstatement to his old job. So, these are situations where people know their rights and file complaints. This doesn't always happen. So, how many cases are there where people just sort of roll with it and the employer gets away with something illegal like this? So, another example, Santa Clarita, California, a nonprofit animal sanctuary. A group of employees at the Gentle Barn, a nonprofit animal sanctuary, had conversations complaining about several executives of the organization, including how the founder was verbally abusive and yelled at employees. 2 days later, 2 of the employees were fired. During conversations with the employees, the founder and the president made statements that gave them the impression that their private conversations complaining about the founder's treatment of employees had been under surveillance. 2 employees filed charges against the Gentle Barn with the, not so gentle, I guess, with the NLRB's Los Angeles regional office, alleging that they were unlawfully fired for engaging in protected concerted activity, that the Gentle Barn not only created an impression of surveillance, but also engaged in actual surveillance of their private conversations. The region conducted an investigation and issued complaint against the Gentle Barn. Prior to the scheduled hearing, the 2 employees and the Gentle Barn entered into a private settlement agreement. One more example, and then we'll get back to the chat, and then we'll probably be wrapping up the stream for today. I will be doing at least one other stream soon to get to the many articles I pulled for today. And to think I was concerned I didn't have enough material for today. Never the case. Anyway, last example, Hartford, Connecticut, Emergency Medical Response Company. After a work-related incident, an employee criticized her supervisor in a post on Facebook, which prompted other employees to reply to the posting. The employee was suspended the next day and later fired. The NLRB issued a complaint alleging that the employee was unlawfully fired for engaging in protected concerted activity when she posted on Facebook. Prior to a hearing, the case settled. Dawn Marie S. was a long-term paramedic for American Medical Response of Connecticut, Inc., an emergency medical service provider in New Haven, Connecticut. After a verbal disagreement with her supervisor at work, Dawn Marie went home and posted a negative comment about her supervisor on her private Facebook page. Dawn Marie's post prompted replies from other employees who were friends with Dawn Marie on Facebook. Dawn Marie was suspended the next day and ultimately fired. In making the decision to fire her, the company relied in part on Dawn Marie's Facebook post, arguing that Dawn Marie violated the company's internet policy when she criticized her supervisor online. The charge was filed with the Hartford NLRB regional office, alleging that Dawn Marie was unlawfully fired. The charge also alleged the company's handbook contained unlawful provisions, which, among other things, prohibited employees from making negative comments about the company or supervisors. After an investigation, the NLRB issued a complaint alleging that Dawn Marie was unlawfully fired because she engaged in protected concerted activity when she criticized her supervisor on Facebook. The complaint also alleged that the company's handbook contained several unlawful provisions, which, let me just add, if your company has an employee handbook, check it out. If there's a worker center near you, or, you're become adept at navigating this stuff and interpreting it, check it out, because odds are there's probably at least one thing that is not legit in there, but check it out. Let's see what you can do. Anyway, prior to a hearing, the company agreed to revise the provisions in the handbook, which were alleged to be unlawful. The company also reached a private settlement with Dawn Marie regarding her termination. So there are some examples for you of protected concerted activity. Learn it well. These are your rights. The few rights that U.S. workers have when it comes to labor organizing. We should make the most of them. So it starts with knowledge. Learn what they are and do what you can. All right, let's get back to the chat. We've been going for about an hour and 40 minutes here, so I think I'm just going to do a little chat here. We will wrap up, and then we'll come back real soon. If not tomorrow, then soon thereafter. So, and we'll get to all these articles about the U.S. right wing. I think this is probably a good place to wrap up. Okay, so we got one here. This is from the Sell Me on Socialism person. You know, this isn't a debate bro stream. I'm happy to take a couple of Socialism 101 questions here. But anyway, the comment comes out with, don't you guys think that everyone will be happier if the taxes were lower, thus raising salary? Oh boy. And working less days and hours. There are already countries where you only work 4 days a week. Then no one needs to be. All right. I think we're good here. Yeah, so actually, if you look at what's been going on with income tax in the United States, it started out as just being on the very high income. Over time, the tax burden has been shifted increasingly away from corporations and from the very wealthy towards the working class. Why? Because the political power of the capitalist class has grown relative to the shrinking and declining workers' movement. This is a problem. We have to rectify it. This channel is all about, helping to lay the foundation for rectifying it. Ultimately, though, it's got to translate into organizing. But no, that's like a libertarian talking point that like, oh, actually, what's good for capitalists, cutting taxes, is good for workers. No, it isn't. The interests of capitalists and workers are diametrically opposed and antagonistic to each other. What's good for workers is bad for capitalists. What's bad for capitalists is, I think I just said that twice. But anyway, you get the point. We're in class struggle here. So workers and capitalists, you can't collaborate with the capitalists because they are exploiting you for what we call surplus value. This is all of the stuff that you have to produce at your job that is in excess of your paycheck just for the privilege of making your paycheck. So you work 8 hours and your paycheck is covered in the first hour, like you produce enough goods and services to cover your paycheck in the first hour. Then why do you have to keep working for another 7 hours when you don't get any of that money? That is the price of admission to the capitalist workshop. So if the capitalist didn't own it, then there would be no capitalist for you to have to pay that price to. All the goods and services that you produce would, probably not go directly back to you, but would be socialized in some way that it's not just getting pocketed by a capitalist. So as just, very beginning of this, very sort of foundational, this, I don't know, whatever else you were talking about in that comment, but maybe come back another day. All right. Favorite Air America commentator other than Sam Cedar? I don't listen to Sam Cedar. Is Air America still a thing? Didn't that go offline in the 2000s or something? What are you talking about? Okay. Some odd people finding their way into the chat today. All right, some discussion of Bill Gates here. Pretty aimless chat. Let's keep catching up here. So, I didn't give the usual disclaimer here of not sort of getting into stuff too much in the chat. It makes it very hard for me to read and respond to, but there's a lot of it today. Anyway, somebody says, yes, talking about shingles earlier. Shingles is terrible. I had chickenpox twice growing up. and also had shingles when I was around 10 to 12 years old. Really, that's very young. Yeah, it tends to cause permanent scars when it comes back, unlike chickenpox, which just fades and goes away. And yeah, it can cause nerve damage. It can be very painful. Yeah, so somebody says, look into the Princeton study on U.S. democracy. It shows how corporations and the wealthy determine who gets elected and what policies are implemented. Yeah, this is dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. It's class rule by the bourgeoisie. So one class rules always. The capitalist class rules this society. It's their government. They run this society. Bourgeois society, based on the exchange of commodities. That's what we're living in now. So yeah, it's not surprising. Like, okay, one of the files that we just put up, Lenin's quote, democracy and dictatorship, the third to last video on the channel currently, is about this. In that, Lenin is talking to other socialists, criticizing them, who are talking about pure democracy. This is an opportunistic error that feeds into the bourgeoisie and their narrative. So you can't just have pure democracy because in class society, one class dominates. So if you just have pure democracy in capitalism, it's still like so much is weighted towards the bourgeoisie that this just doesn't work. And if you try to transition into socialism while still affording the bourgeoisie all these rights, that's not going to work either, to put it really simply. Go listen to the file for the more detailed version. But yeah, so the Princeton study on democracy, I keep mentioning it. I was going to do an audiobook of it. Honestly, the actual study is I found not the most compelling material to just read. But basically what it found, I mention it a lot actually, is it points to how non-reformable the system is. Elections are bought with a very high degree of accuracy. So in over 80% of elections in the United States, and for House races, it's much higher than that, it's over 90%. The person who spends the most money wins. So basically, elections are bought. It's still a little bit of a gamble, but if you spend more money, better than 9 out of 10 times, you're going to win the race. That's there should not be any type of relationship like that. You know, that's not democracy. Democracy is one person, one vote. $1, one vote is undemocratic. Why? Because some people have more dollars than others. That's not democracy. So yeah, and the Princeton study does prove that. You can just look it up. Princeton study, U.S. democracy. I mean, anytime the Democrats start talking about, you know, our democracy is in danger, there literally is not democracy. I don't know what else to say. So continuing the comment, when the wealthy who can offer financial support and benefits to the politicians that continue to keep in line with what the wealthy want, they will get their agenda implemented, and their agenda is profits, not the wealth of citizens. Yeah, it's class rule. The bourgeoisie want to perpetuate capitalism. This government is a tool for that. So social democrats make the error of keeping the capitalist state around, but trying to just reform and regulate things. You can't do that. Anarchists make the mistake of just abolish the capitalist state and replace it with nothing. That's also a mistake. You need to abolish capitalism and replace it with an organization intending to build socialism. So, workers' government. So, talking about Bill Gates. Did I wear an N95? I do that. I do that now. I don't give a fuck if people comment. No, that's fine. You should. Um, yeah, N95, KN95. I haven't taken the step to the elastomeric, which is like the gas mask looking one. But yeah, if you're gonna wear a mask, wear one that actually works, N95 or KN95. So N95 is a US standard, KN95 is a Chinese standard. And nothing against China, but allegedly a lot of the KN95s getting sold are counterfeit. I tend to go towards the N95s, both because I find that the way that the straps are create a tighter seal more reliably for me. Also, the KN95s, I mean, according to US health and safety organizations, they found like 60% of the KN95s being sold in the US were not really up to the KN95 standard. So I don't know if that's accurate, but I know that the N95s are pretty tightly regulated. Like if you make counterfeit N95s, you're in deep shit in the US and it's a US standard. So um, anyway, I tend to stick to the N95. The KN95s also with the ear loops. I just find that they don't I use them in some settings, but more like outdoors. So anyway, I produced a community hybrid event so that we could reopen safely and caught it there. Well, that just goes to show how really this is just not safe. Like nothing about it is. We need much, much stronger community controls for transmission. Yeah. Had to fly last week. 1 to 3 of us on the flight were wearing masks. Yeah. I mean, it's like you go to a supermarket now, there'll be like 3 people in the entire store wearing a mask. Why else do you think that that stream is stream? Sorry, I was reading the next comment. I've also been talking for like almost 2 hours. Why do you think that that surge, the that we showed at the beginning, the sewage curve? Why do you think it's hanging in there so much? Nobody's wearing masks. So we haven't had a surge this bad this time of year previously. It's because nobody's wearing masks and there's no shutdown and all of the stuff. And plus, the strains that are happening now are much more contagious than any previous strain. Like BA.2 was 20 to 25% more contagious than BA.1, and then BA.2.12 was 20% more contagious than that, and then so on and so on. So it's not, it doesn't seem to be getting more severe, but it is getting more contagious. So more times you get it, that's just bad. Also, if you get multiple strains at the same time, it can engage in recombination. You can create not just mutations from replication, but they can actually swap genetic material. So you don't have to rely on a chance mutation. They can actually just swap genetic material and make a. You can make your very own recombinant strain of COVID in your own body. You don't want to do that. Also, we don't want it. The rest of us don't want that existing. So, and it can stop existing if people stop transmission. But again, you need this on a society-wide population level. All right. A few more comments. Ready to get rid of in the chat here. They're just stopping in to say that socialism is a plague. I would actually say that the current system is a plague. Current system spreading war, poverty, disease. That would be a plague. But okay. Fed raising interest rates won't tackle inflation because it's not monetary this time. Milton is wrong. Supply side inflation can't be solved this way. Do go on. I'd be interested in hearing more about that. I don't know. I got to say I've lost the thread on some of that stuff. What the Fed has been doing post 2008, they have been doing all kinds of sorcery that is just fairly unprecedented, and honestly, I can't follow it all. So. All right. Why are Latino voters in the U.S. starting to lean Republican? I think they always have. I don't know if it's in greater numbers now. The Democratic Party being complete shit probably isn't helping, but specifically, I don't know. I haven't delved into that. So we're caught up with the chat. If anyone else has anything else that they would like to add before we sign off for the day, again, we will be coming back pretty soon. In the meantime, thanks again to the patrons whose names I have already shown. But seeing no further comments, I'm going to just wrap up for the day. So like I said, we'll be back again soon. Thank you for listening to S4A live stream number 23. And we'll catch you in the next video.